Thanks very much for coming, everyone. As promised, you'll have pizzas at the end. Right, so I know it's the end of the day. I know it has been a long day, and there were lots of very interesting sessions all day long. So hopefully mine will not be boring. It's not going to be slow. I'll try to be a bit quick, so otherwise you'll all fall asleep, and I'll fall asleep myself. So I'm going to go through it. I'll tell you a bit more about what I want to talk about, but mainly the main idea today is about the considerations for going to the cloud, which is something I'm sure many organizations are facing today. Should we go to Dynamics CRM in the cloud, or should we stay on-premise? And before we do that, I just want to quickly, they twisted my arm to have to show this slide, to thank all our sponsors for sponsoring us, obviously, and I would like to thank everyone who helped arranging the sessions and the event today. And thanks for my Swiss knife. Really good. Only problem is you don't want a Mohammed on a flight back with a Swiss knife. So I can't take it back with me. I'm really sorry, but I'm gonna get it shipped.
So we won't see you for the next.
Yeah. Otherwise, there's no more CRM Sundays for me. Right. So there's a bit of delay. So the three main things I'm going to talk about today. One is from a business and strategic perspective. What are the considerations we should have for Dynamics 365 Cloud? Also, there's some technical considerations, but I'm also going to use some lessons I personally have learned on some of my Dynamics implementations, and one particularly that I worked on, which had almost 13,000 Dynamics CRM online users. So it's a massive program from a number of users' perspective. It's online in the cloud, and there were lots of lessons learned. Some of them were positive, some of them were negative, but I think overall it was a very good experience for me, which I would like to share throughout the discussion. Please, by all means, this is an interactive session, so I don't want to be talking all the time. I will be asking you questions. I'll be asking for your ideas, your thoughts, your experiences, because I think all of us can learn from each other. So if everyone talks about their own experiences, we can all learn from it. The other thing is, as I said, the more interactions, the more benefit for all of us. But also, bear in mind, this is going to be a very, I'll try to make it as balanced as possible. So I'm not coming in with already a perceived idea, this is the answer, this is the right, this is the wrong. I'll be kind of putting in some ideas, some thoughts, and I'll be happy to be challenged, to have different opinions, and hear from everyone's experiences throughout. And by all means, this is not going to be an exclusive list of every consideration you should have for cloud. So I'll be sharing my slides afterwards, but by all, if you have any additional considerations, anything I missed, anything you would like to add, I would love to hear from you. Right. So how many times have you heard this? The answer is the cloud. What's the question? I personally heard that many times from a lot of, especially Microsoft colleagues, who, when we start talking about a new program, and the Microsoft sales guy says, the answer is the cloud. What's your question? What do you want? So it's always the cloud, and then you think something else. Well, there's some sense in that, but at the same time, I think there's very good reasons why a client, a customer, an end client would actually consider on-premise, and there are good reasons for it. So these are some of the common reasons I've heard clients talking about, and today we're going to talk about some of these. As I said, it will differ from one organization to the other. I don't think there's one answer fits all. I think every organization has to consider all the factors that affect their decision. Now, we know that the cloud is where everything is moving forward, and we'll talk about that in more detail, but I think every organization will have to do their own assessment and their own considerations, and they shouldn't take one answer or the other as granted. Some organizations, you go and meet them, they've already decided it's going to be on-premise because whatever reason, because some of those reasons, or they might be already, it's a cloud, and we're going to think about solving the problems later. I think they should always think first and then make a decision afterwards. So hopefully the session today will try to cover some of these points with your help, with your interaction. I think the biggest common reason that I heard was around cybersecurity, data protection. Where's my data located? Lots of our clients, especially financial services here in Zurich, got lots of headquarters for some of the largest financial organizations in the world. They're always asking, is my data hosted in the US, for example? Does that mean anyone can access my data? Does NSA have the tools to hack into my system in the cloud? We all heard about the cyber attack that happened yesterday, which affected the UK actually massively. And many, I think 99 countries have been affected. So very good and important question and consideration. I don't think anyone should overlook this consideration. I will talk more about this. Is it really more secure to have your data on-premise in your own data center, or is it more secure to have it in Microsoft Cloud? Do you have better security as a client, as an end client, or would Microsoft have a better security for penetration and hacking and so on? And then there is another question around regulatory and compliance, and I think that's a big question. Again, financial service organizations or highly regulated businesses, they always have to consider that. The example I mentioned, or the program I worked on that had 13,000 online users, the organization was regulated by 17 different regulatory bodies in the UK. So they were in the UK and worldwide. So they would be checked and audited by 17 different regulatory bodies. So they ask that question almost every single day about every single action you were doing. So again, very important consideration. We, for regulatory and compliance and also the data protection, we actually, because it was a big project, Microsoft shipped like 3-4 execs from their data centers, from their product team, all the way to London, and we sat in a room for 3 days, non-stop, 9 to 5, 3 days, one after the other, covering every single item about regulatory, compliance. We ended up with lots and lots of documentation, which was very, very useful. Can we do this? Does this comply with this regulation? Does this comply with this regulation? I mean, to be fair, the good news was we ticked every single box that every regulatory out of the 17 required. It was a very difficult and long 3 days, but we actually got everything ticked. So Microsoft Cloud, they've done everything because they want everyone to go to the cloud. They've done everything to make sure that there isn't a gap. And when there was a gap, they managed to close it down. So to the point that what Microsoft offered for this client, that the databases that are in the cloud, which were in Ireland and like the main data centers in Ireland, the databases and the whole servers, not even people working at Microsoft can access it. They have to have an encryption key, and the encryption key is kept with the client. So if someone in Microsoft needs to access their database in Microsoft data center, they actually have to contact someone at the head of IT security for the client to allow them to access the database. So really robust kind of measures. But again, there are organizations which just the idea of having their data in the cloud could be really worrying. Can I stop here now and ask everyone in this room, what is your current experiences? I mean, how many works in financial services first? Anyone work in financial services in the room? Anyone works in a highly regulated business? Yeah. So other than that, even if you're not, but what are your kind of experiences with the cloud versus on-premise? Do you think those things would have been a killer for cloud projects and becoming on-premise? Anyone?
Yeah, defense.
Defense, for example, yeah, absolutely. So is that UK defense?
UK defense, yeah.
So they would never go cloud? No?
No.
So it's an interesting one, because Microsoft did a big announcement 2-3 months ago when they had the new UK data center, UK Azure data center. They said that the MOD, the Ministry of Defense, has moved some of their processes into the cloud. Is that true? Is that?
I think this still does not comply, because what they want to do basically SharePoint on-premise for documentation and stuff. Yeah. And obviously ADX Studio as well. Yeah. And then to integrate with the cloud CRM, that was going to be issue, and defense going to be.
Yeah. Okay, that's very interesting. Anyone else? Someone had? Did you have anything to add? Cloud versus on-prem from your own experiences?
I mean, from my experience, the CRM update. I mean, many customers don't want to get the latest version. They delay the version as late as possible. Or we, as partner, we try to make them delay as soon as possible. We are not ready. So that is one of the stopping the customer prepare. Okay, on-premise, I buy this version and I get until it works.
Yes, and that's definitely. I mean. The regular CRM updates with CRM Online, you've got updates every 6 months. Not many organizations are happy to have a team always ready and standby. Every 6 months they have to test. This is becoming a regular activity. But then it goes back to the point of, is really CRM a one-off project, or should CRM be an always ongoing enhancement?
It's always forever, like any software project.
So because many people, many organizations now start to think, well, you know what, CRM should be an ongoing project. Doesn't mean it has to be an expensive, always on project, but it means you always have to be up to date with it. Maintenance, support, and BAU. The organization that I was mentioning earlier, the 13,000 online users, or 13,000 users, they calculated that if they want to do a real robust server architecture, they were talking about tens of servers and networking of massive scale just to make sure they can work with 13,000 users across, I think, 19 offices in the UK. It was a really difficult ask. They had to hire a lot. They would have a whole team, a whole department, just to look after the infrastructure, to look after the application, to look after the whole connectivity into this application. For them to throw away all these responsibilities into the cloud, into Microsoft, was a much better solution. So it actually came from the CTO, who would normally, many CTOs would be thinking, I would rather have everything around me, everything in my own data center, I can access it, I can do everything I want, I can service it and support it myself. The CTO themselves were actually saying, you know what, I would rather have Microsoft worry about this. If something goes wrong, it's Microsoft's problem, not mine. And I think it was a valid point, because you can always say, here I am, I'm giving you 13,000 users, Mr. Microsoft, you need to go and worry about this for me. So I think there are, for and against again, but many users or many CTOs now, many IT directors would think that I would have a better support from Microsoft rather than creating a whole function if I have a big program. And then there is also the license cost. One of the main factors, one of the big factors that I remember many clients would push back, maybe 2011, 2012, when cloud started to become a Microsoft push. They were always saying, well, cloud costs a lot more because I'm still, I'm paying for the cloud. The license for the on-premise is cheaper, and I'm paying for the cloud a lot more per user per month, as opposed to proprietary software if I buy on-premise. Now Microsoft has changed that model to twist everyone's arms to make sure that you move into the cloud. So they now pretty much the license fees, as far as I understand, the license fees for online and for on-premise is the same. It's per user per month. The difference is if you got it in the cloud, you don't pay for the infrastructure or the first-line support. So I think the license cost bit is now in the past, I would say. And then there's the very important technical and integration. So I have 10 systems on-prem. I've got on-premise. I don't have anything in the cloud. Would I put the Dynamics CRM in the cloud, the Dynamics 365 in the cloud, or should I keep it on-premise with the rest of the other solutions? How difficult the integration is going to be. Again, very valid and I think realistic questions, but let's go through that in a bit more detail. So from a business perspective, yes, we've got the 6 months updates every 6 months, but there is also the thinking of, well, if you do less and less custom development, you will be able to upgrade, and Microsoft would pretty much guarantee that your upgrade will be smooth because you're using out-of-the-box configuration, out-of-the-box workflows and business rules and all the new features that Microsoft Dynamics has that allows you to do more configuration. Now, you will never, if it's a big program, you will never be able to do everything out of the box. But if you stick to configuration to use the features that are built in the solution as much as possible, you will actually be much closer to the Microsoft updates, and you will be able to benefit from it. But then the other element is that there are new features which are only supported in Microsoft CRM Online. So project services, field services, all the AI work that Microsoft is pushing for now, that's only available in the cloud. So again, it's an important consideration. I know clients who were on-premise, but because a project service is only going to be in the cloud, they have to reconsider, or a field service, they have to reconsider. They have to think, well, I might as well just go to the cloud so I don't miss out. The other thing is that every 6 months update, while it is, it's a burden on any team or on any client, but it also brings in value because every 6 months you have new features. You might be able to get rid of some of the custom development and replace that with some new features. We talked a bit about the hardware and infrastructure, so I'll try to be a bit more quicker and go through this quicker. From a performance and scalability, what Microsoft promises is that as you bring more and more users into the system, they promise to scale up and scale down your application based on usage. And I've seen that firsthand. Many clients who would sometimes might have not as fast as they would expect in experiences. They would raise a ticket with Microsoft, and Microsoft could literally move the whole instance into a better performant cloud group. Depends on the number of users, depends on other things, but I think Microsoft can scale up and down based on your number of users, based on lots of other factors. Does anyone have experience around the cloud, around good performance, bad performance? Yeah.
In some instances of customer, I noticed that in the weekend, for example, the performance of CRM is drastically down.
Yeah.
Drastically, I mean, because I think they see as a pattern, so most of the users work from Monday to Friday, and on Saturday and Sunday, I connect to that CRM instance, okay, I need to wait and wait and wait. It definitely does, but it was also not only down, but also up. So.
Yes, yeah. But have you tried to kind of raise a ticket with Microsoft or raise something around performance and you saw a...
No, my customer don't pay enough for me for that, so.
Anyone else? Anyone else has any experiences? No? Okay. The other element that I think many clients would start to consider is GDPR. I don't know how many people in the room are aware of GDPR? No? Anyone else? Have you heard of GDPR, the new General Data Protection Regulation? Are you all in Europe, or anyone outside of Europe? So everyone is in Europe. So there's a new EU regulation that is going to take it's going to take effect on the 18th, I think, of May 2018, and this regulation affects every single system, especially any system that connects to or captures customer information. So if you have any customer information, your system is impacted by GDPR. And GDPR fines, according to the EU regulation, goes as high as 4% of the annual revenue of the organization. So if your organization, if your client or your company had a hack and you lost your customer information due to negligence or whatever, the EU could fine your company up to 4% of your annual revenue. So imagine a company doing, I don't know, $100 million or 100 million euros or pounds. They could literally pay £4 million fine for a breach. And now, what GDPR means, we could have a whole hour talking about GDPR, but at a high level, what GDPR also means is that the responsibility is no longer just the client. The responsibility now has moved on to the partner who's delivering the solution. So every person connected to the solution or to the project or to the system. So if you have an offshore team, let's say in India or anywhere else in the world, they are also responsible and impacted by GDPR, which wasn't the case before. So that's a massive impact, and not many organizations realize how big that is. This is about everything about your customer data, so not just sensitive information such as ethnicity or sexuality or religion or anything like that. It also goes down to what they call personal identifiable data, PID. Anything that identifies a customer is part of that and goes under the GDPR responsibility. So, going back to the main subject, so do we actually think Microsoft is better to protect the GDPR from being a cloud solution, or is it more the client data center will have a better protection? Open question. I'm sure everyone will have their own opinions, but I think, from my point of view, I think Microsoft have, first of all, they committed to being GDPR compliant for the whole of the EU. They committed that every single process they have across their whole data centers that by May 2018 will be compliant GDPR. They committed contractually with any client in Microsoft's cloud that they will contractually be responsible for the GDPR, for their own GDPR processes. But that doesn't take the responsibility out of the client. It means that the client still has the responsibility of designing the CRM solution to be compliant with GDPR, and also it means that the client is responsible to protect the data from being exported from CRM, for example, and to a spreadsheet and then get lost, and then you've got the same issue. So it doesn't end there, but it helps from a Microsoft perspective. So I've written a number of articles about GDPR and Dynamics 365. I'll share my blog, and if you would like to know more about it, and maybe this is something I can talk about at a later stage. But it's a very important, I'm quite passionate about the data security element of that. Data disaster recovery. Not many organizations have a robust disaster recovery. Microsoft Cloud, they would guarantee some kind of disaster recovery. You can even pay for additional disaster recovery coverage. And I think what you really get if you go to the cloud, the major thing for me at least, is you're buying into the ecosystem. You're buying into the whole Microsoft cloud. You're not just getting Dynamics 365 cloud, you're also getting Office 365 cloud. You're getting Azure, you're getting Azure Service Bus, you're getting the AI framework. You're getting lots and lots of different APIs and functionality that will help your solutions. So as new features and new functionality comes in, you can still do a lot when you're on premise, but it will not be as good as if you already have your solution in the cloud. So I think that, for me, is a very important discussion that you should have with your clients or with your internal stakeholders. What do you want to do in 5 years' time? And accordingly, if you really want to be doing a lot of innovative stuff, then you must be thinking about the cloud. Even if it's not today, then it should be in the near future. According to Gartner, by 2022, 60% of all applications will be in the cloud. So again, it's another consideration for any organization. If you're making a decision today to go to Dynamics 365 on-premise, you need to consider and think about that your other applications, the 10, 15 other applications you need to integrate with, they themselves might move into other clouds.
Do you have a question?
Of course, please do.
So when we talk about CRM, it's not only CRM, there are always another systems that CRMs has to talk to. Yeah. For instance, in our case, we have some ERPs in the same infrastructure. So when I raise this subject of going to the cloud, the other systems will remain in the on-premise.
Yes.
Like they have some government databases or some ERP systems. So for me, for myself, it will be a difficult technical decision because I will be the only one in the cloud, but the other ones will remain under the firewalls, under the some networks in there. So it will be, for me, it will be a big burden to talk to other guys. Yeah. So when the customer asks me this, okay, will it be problematic for you? What should I answer them?
So I was going to cover the integration actually on next slides. I was going to do reporting and then integration. If you don't mind, I hold on to your question until I get to integration so I don't jump and come back to it, but it's a very valid question and I think it's a very valid consideration that everyone has to. I've got a whole kind of slide talking just about the integration and I think everyone will have experiences as well around that, but if you don't mind just holding on to this question until... I think reporting is quite important because many clients would decide to go to the cloud while not understanding what actually the cloud means, the cloud means from a reporting perspective. So there are limitations, there are things that, because you're still part of a public cloud, there are limitations that has to be considered. So for example, to write a custom report, you can't write normal TSQL queries or SQL queries. You have to use fetch XML, which is quite powerful enough, but it's not as powerful as writing SQL queries. SQL queries at the end of the day are much powerful. You can do a lot, you've got access to the database, you can do everything you want. Another limitation is you can't have an SSRS server on-premise. If you already have an SSRS or reporting server on-premise, you can't connect that to CRM Online to schedule reports. So some clients have scheduling reports requirements. You can't do that. Now Microsoft, to overcome this, have done a number of solutions, or there are a number of solutions to resolve this. One of them, for example, is using the new Dynamics export services. What do they call it today? Data export services. So data export services allow you to export data from Dynamics 365 into an Azure SQL database, which you can then set up an SSRS report server, and you can schedule your reports and do everything you want. But it comes at a cost. It also comes at an additional database. Previously, we would have a hybrid model where you have a CRM in the cloud and you have a database on-prem, which again you synchronize or replicate to, and you run your SSRS scheduling reports onto it. And I'm sure there are other solutions. Anyone has any other solutions for the scheduling of reports, for example, that you can think of?
Not scheduling, but Power BI can be an option now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is more and more replacing the fetch XML, so instead of doing reports inside CRM, you do a Power BI dashboard, and the CEO is very happy about. So yes, if he's happy, everybody's happy. So.
Exactly, he pays the money, right? Yeah, absolutely. So Power BI, again, you probably have a better experience working with Power BI than writing an SSRS custom report. So yes, that's another solution. But I think there is the 5 minutes query timeout that I found personally frustrating on certain points. I don't know if that has changed, but just the fact that it's a 5 minutes timeout. If you got, is it 2 minutes now?
It is 2 minutes, yeah. So some plugins run more than 2 minutes. It times out online.
I think for
I
plugins,
think it's a different timeout for reporting.
Reports, yeah. So I'm pretty sure from that one because I got it from the SDK. I stole it.
So just on that front, like
Yeah,
if customers is a complex plugins are there, it runs more than 2 minutes.
Yes.
What do you do?
And that's my second slide. I'm talking about that as well. Slow. Sorry. It's wirelessly connected to here. Right. I'm going to have to run you through this quicker. Sorry. Right. There's also the limitation of the 50,000 rows, which I think is a big limitation, because you will have, I had clients who had 22 million customers in the database. So to run a query that you can only return a maximum of 50,000 for a chart is quite limiting. Obviously, it will slow down any CRM system to run a query that brings back more than 50,000, but still, you might want to have that flexibility. So at the moment, this is a limitation. Do you want to say something?
Yes. Even if you just want to make some counts, aggregated so months of 1 year.
Yeah.
So generally, you would expect only 12 records.
Yeah.
But if the data in the background more than 50,000 records, you don't get your results.
Yes. Yes.
And it could be increased up to 250.
Okay.
That's a limit.
Right. I think, and that goes back to the point that we mentioned earlier about the data export services, that you might, in order not to slow down your CRM system, even if you're on-premise, it might be better to run shorter or smaller queries and leave all the large queries that return more than 50,000 into another database or data warehouse or something of that sort. But it is a valid concern and it is an important consideration. Integrations, trying to go through that quickly. Firewalls, and that's your point. So if you're doing an integration, you have to consider: do I actually need to open a firewall port? Most organizations will be happy to do that. Do I need then to set up something on-premise that does a pull out of the cloud, which then goes through port 80 or whatever, or go through SSL? And then if I have an on-premise application, do I have to expose these web services externally? Lots of considerations around that. The data security element, obviously, if I open up a port. But I've also seen lots of problems where you have iframes or cross-domain restrictions where you've got CRM in the cloud and you've got, let's say, SharePoint on-premise. Again, there are lots of considerations. It can be done, not to say it cannot be done, but it is an important consideration. SSL requirements, if you open up a web service, you might need to consider all the SSL requirements that you might need to have an SSL. And also, if you have a telephony system and you need to integrate with it, how are you going to do that with the cloud? It can be done, certainly, and I've personally done it, I'm sure everyone have some exposure to it, but it's another consideration. One solution or one workaround that Microsoft gives you is around the express routes, where it's almost like a tunnel from the cloud to your system, which allows you to do a lot more. So I think integrating with local on-premise applications, you can do a lot with something like express routes, because it allows you to have a much faster, it's an MPLN basically tunnel into your cloud. So I would recommend you look at this as one of your options. Any other ideas on integration? I think, trying to be quickly, normally I do this session in about an hour, but I'm cut for time. The other technical considerations, which, going back to your point, I think, so you've got the 2 minutes timeout for plugins and custom workflows, which is difficult. Again, Microsoft push back on this. They say, well, you shouldn't write a plugin or a custom workflow that takes more than 2 minutes. It's, obviously you can say, well, that's my requirement. It does require more than 2 minutes. I think if you raise a ticket, they might allow you to have a bit more. I've seen one client who was given that to increase the timeout. You could do these things in the registry if you have an on-premise. You can't do that in the cloud unless you raise a ticket, and they might or might not accept to do it for you. So having access to the database, having access to registry settings gives you a lot more flexibility if you're on-premise, but it doesn't give you that if you're in the cloud. You don't have access to the physical database. You can't do your own indexing the way you want to do it on your in the cloud. There was a limit of 200 workflows, 300 dialogues, 300 custom entities. I'm happy to say that this has been lifted. I've got a link here which you can't see. But according to this MSDN article, this limitation has now been lifted, so you can have more than 300 custom entities in CRM Online. The count will still be there. So if you go into your Dynamics CRM Online settings, you will see that you've got 250 out of 300 workflows, for example. But even if you reach that level and you carry on, it will still work. I haven't tried it, but that's what Microsoft is saying. Yeah, and then you've got the authentication and Active Directory synchronization. So if you're going for the cloud, you have to synchronize your Active Directory in the cloud with your on-premise Active Directory, so Azure AD Sync. Any other points? Anything else someone want to add on the technical considerations? So you mentioned the 2 minutes. How did you deal with it? How did you solve this problem?
Azure Web Jobs.
Azure?
Web Jobs.
Web shops.
Web Jobs.
Web jobs.
Yeah, so we'll console app, and then it's a requirement that you need to generate 1,000 PDFs a month.
Yeah.
Which will definitely.
Which you can't. Yeah. So you got an Azure Web Job that reads from Dynamics.
So it's a console app.
Yes.
Where you publish in the web as a web job.
Oh, okay.
And it's scheduled to run every month.
Okay.
I've done with the XAML workflow.
Okay.
So basically, you can loop through different times.
Yeah.
I had to access 100,000 records. So that's basically, I put like 10,000 records in each call and then loop through it.
Okay. So XAML workflows, Azure Web Jobs running a console app. Any other ideas? Any other?
If you have just a job running locally, retrieving data in 5,000 chunks, manipulating data and writing them back.
Right back to CRM. Okay.
Very nice.
Yeah. And I think the data export service hopefully will help with that as well, because you could export it into an Azure SQL database, which you can do whatever you want with it. And I think you can synchronize with it. By default, it's 15 minutes, but you can synchronize with it into 2 minutes or 1 minute. So you've got more flexibility with the Azure, with the data export services. Any other ideas or suggestions on how to handle the timeout or the registry key issues? I think this idea I think those two ideas were good. I didn't know about the XAML ones.
Yeah, I've done this for Turkish Football Federation, where I had to generate like thousands of tickets on, let's say if you're adding an event to a series. So basically if there were 50,000 customers, then there would maybe, if there are 20 matches in a league, so that will be 50 multiplied by 20. So maybe, I don't know, a million records or something like that. So I had to do that basically in the XAML workflow. So plugin will run on the creation of one event. In the background, obviously, it will be XAML, which will look through and it won't time out.
That sounds good. Now, I mentioned quickly that there are a lot of features that Microsoft are only releasing to the cloud. So it's a very important consideration that if you're aiming to go if you're making a decision of whether to go to the cloud or on-premise, there's a number of features that are only available in the cloud. So if a client is choosing Dynamics CRM or Dynamics 365 because they want a specific feature or a specific functionality that is only available in the cloud, they have to take into account this. I've got one slide. I'm not going to take you through all these details. There's lots of them. I've got the source here at the bottom, but that's, again, I'll take Microsoft word for it. Those features, all these features, are only available in the cloud. Now, when I did this session in Dublin, someone assured me that they got the app designer and sitemap designers on-premise, although Microsoft MSDN article says it's not available. But all these features, according to Microsoft, are not available except in the cloud. So imagine all the analytics, all the advanced service analytics that are being released, the connected field services, the customer insight service, portal service enhancement, portal service automation, relationship insights. I've put in bold some of the stuff that I think is very important. Learning path, guided help customizations. All these features are only available in CRM Online, in the cloud, but are not available in on-premise. So I think this is a very important consideration for any client before they make the decision for on-premise, to consider that you're not getting any of these features for your money.
So I was saying field one won't be available?
Well, at the moment, it's not. I think Microsoft has mentioned that it might become available in the future to on-premise, and because everything is cloud first now, they have only released it for the cloud. But it might become available in the future.
Regarding the portal, Microsoft will release one time the source code of the current version of the portal.
Yes.
The updates, they will be cloud only, but later we release a one time only. So to make it easier for people that have older version of ADX Studio, 7X, so they have a custom ASPX page, so they can grab the source code when they will be released and make a transfer to a newer version.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point.
Yeah, but it will be only one time.
Yeah. So it's a one-time release of the source code.
One-time release of the source code, no support of the source code, nothing about it.
Yeah. So Microsoft is basically releasing the source code of the ADX Studio portals, what used to be ADX Studio before the acquisition, so that if you want to build your own portal that works directly with Dynamics CRM on-prem or Dynamics 365 on-premise, you will be able to do that, but it's a one-off source code, so future updates will not be included, it will not have a source code.
Do you know anything about voice of customer? Because it was, it is not here on the list, and I have researched it, and it was only, well, I don't want to use it. So
if you didn't choose yet voice of customer, don't choose
voice of customer. You had bad experiences yourself?
Yeah, not personally, but many bad experience. The main problem with the voice of customer, is the synchronization of the data. They have many issues of the data is not coming inside CRM, or slowly, or you need to raise a ticket to get when I can get my data. So if you rely on some other products like Dimension, for example, that is more reliable, you should, of course. But personally, I'm not aware of roadmaps for on-premise.
Yeah. There's something new as well, email engagement, which is which is kind of new as well. It's actually in beta only. That's again something just online.
Yeah, I mean, there's loads. I mean, if you go to this link, this URL, you will see a big list of many more features. I just took some of the ones that I thought would be, like for example, the 365 groups. Obviously, you can only get it in the cloud. There's quite a few interesting features that will only be available in the cloud. Right, with 3 minutes left, I just want to wrap up, and that's the last slide, I promise. I hope I've given a balanced approach to why would you go on premise or why would you go on the cloud. Lots of considerations. I don't think there's a ready answer for all customers. I think there's a good reason to consider cloud first and think why it can't be cloud. But at the same time, I'm pretty sure there will be customers who are still considering or still consider on-premise is the answer for them. So I wouldn't disregard that. I think overall, I would say the data security, the compliance, the new features, the ecosystem, the availability, the scalability and availability will all push towards the cloud. Microsoft is putting a lot of investment into the cloud. Most of the new releases go cloud first, maybe 12 months later it goes on-premise. So all these are very important considerations. And I think with that, I would like to close the session. All right. By all means, please get connected. I would be very happy to hear your thoughts and ideas and feedback on this. And as I said, I'm sure I haven't covered everything. So if you want to add to it, we can have a discussion about it. All right. Thank you.
Thanks. And click the mesh. Does it